The day my own mother stood in court and asked a judge to declare me mentally unfit, she thought she was taking control of my grandmother's money. What she did not know was that I had spent nearly a decade tracing financial crimes, that every accusation she made had a paper trail waiting behind it, and that by the time she tried to quietly withdraw her case, the court was already preparing to hand everything to federal investigators. My name is Elena Whitmore, and this is the story of how silence, patience, and documentation turned a public humiliation into something far more permanent. Chapter 1. Public humiliation isn't loud, it's quiet and surgical. The room was quieter than I expected, not the respectful quiet of a courtroom you see on television, but a thin, sterile quiet that made every breath feel too loud. Waukesha County Courthouse in March did not smell like justice or fear. It smelled like paper and old carpet, and the faint bitterness of burnt coffee from a hallway machine no one trusted. I sat at the defendant's table, even though I had not done anything wrong. That was the first thing that felt unreal. I was not the one who filed this case. I was not the one asking the court for anything. And yet, every eye in the room drifted toward me as if I were the problem that needed to be solved. I was 38 years old. I had paid my own bills since college. I had built a career that depended on precision and credibility. But that morning, none of that mattered. I was simply the daughter sitting quietly while her mother explained why I could no longer be trusted with my own life. Margaret Hale stood when the judge invited her forward. My mother moved with the calm confidence of someone who believed she was being reasonable. Her hair was carefully styled, her blouse was soft and neutral. Nothing about her appearance suggested conflict. If anything, she looked concerned, patient, loving. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She spoke slowly, choosing words that sounded careful and compassionate. She talked about my history, about how I had always been sensitive, how I struggled with emotional stability when I was younger, how stress seemed to overwhelm me. She said she worried about my decision-making. She said she was afraid I might be taken advantage of. She did not say any of it cruelly. That was the part that hurt the most. She told the court that she was only asking for conservatorship because she loved me, because she wanted to protect me, because she did not want me to make mistakes that could ruin my future. She used phrases like best interest and responsible oversight. She framed herself as a mother stepping in before it was too late. I kept my eyes on the wood grain of the table in front of me. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I could feel heat rising behind my ears. Every instinct told me to interrupt, to explain, to correct her, but I did not. The attorney beside her nodded along. He spoke for her. He spoke for me too, in a way. He referenced documents I had not yet seen. He summarized my life in bullet points designed to make me sound fragile. He used my past against me without once asking me if any of it was true. No one asked me a question. That was when I understood what this hearing really was. It was not a conversation. It was a decision already leaning in one direction, waiting for enough justification to fall. If the petition was approved, I would lose control of the assets my grandmother left me, the house where she raised me, the accounts she added me to when her hands started to shake. My finances would no longer be mine. Someone else would decide what I could access and when. Someone else would speak on my behalf. Someone else would become me on paper. I thought of my grandmother Evelyn. I thought of the way she used to fold her bank statements neatly and tuck them into a drawer by the kitchen phone. I thought of how proud she was that I understood numbers, that I paid attention, that I did not rush. I thought of the day she added my name to her account in 2021. She told me it was just in case. She told me she trusted me. She told me she did not want strangers deciding things for her if she ever got confused. Now, here we were, strangers deciding whether I was capable of honoring that trust. When the judge finally looked up, the room seemed to hold its breath. Judge Helen McAdams had the kind of face that did not reveal much. She had been on the bench long enough to recognize performance. She flipped through the files slowly, one page at a time. Then her hand paused. It was barely noticeable, just a fraction longer than necessary. Her eyes moved back to the top of a page, to my name. She looked at me then, not with sympathy, not with judgment, with recognition. I did not react. I did not give her anything to read. She turned her attention back to my mother and her attorney. Her voice was even. She thanked them for their presentation. Then she issued a simple instruction. She requested that the petitioner submit complete medical records and documentation supporting the claim of incapacity within 7 days. She specified that generalized statements would not be sufficient. She wanted evidence. She wanted dates. She wanted clarity. It was not a victory. It was not a dismissal, but it was a line drawn on the floor. My mother nodded politely. She smiled in the way people smile when they believe they are still in control. The hearing ended shortly after that. Chairs scraped softly as people stood. Conversations resumed at a low murmur. I gathered my bag and walked out without looking back. The hallway outside felt colder. I could hear my shoes against the tile. Each step felt measured, deliberate. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I thought about 2011, the year my parents divorced. I was 14 when my mother remarried. 6 months later, I was living full-time with my grandmother, sleeping in a room that smelled of lavender and old books. No one ever said I was abandoned. It just happened quietly, the way inconvenient things often do. I had learned early that silence could be safer than protest. Standing there in that hallway, I understood something with absolute clarity. This was not about my well-being. This was about control. And if I reacted like a wounded daughter, I would lose before I ever had a chance to speak. I walked out of the courthouse into the pale afternoon light, already knowing that the only way forward was through facts, through records, through patience. If I wanted to survive this, I could not afford to be emotional. I had to be precise. Chapter 2. Being punished before you're guilty. The discipline came quietly, the way institutional decisions always do, wrapped in professional language and delivered with polite faces. I drove into Milwaukee that morning with the radio off, letting the hum of traffic fill the car while I rehearsed nothing at all. There was no speech to prepare, no argument to sharpen. I had learned the night before that emotion would only be used against me, so I left it at home. The Midwest Forensic Group office looked unchanged. Glass doors, muted carpet, the faint smell of toner and burnt coffee. The security guard nodded as I swiped in. The receptionist smiled too quickly, her voice slightly higher than usual when she said good morning. It was the kind of greeting meant to reassure both of us at the same time. I made it to my office and barely had time to set my bag down before an assistant knocked and told me Thomas Reed wanted to see me. Thomas was 52 and always looked like he belonged exactly where he was. His office was orderly to the point of distraction. Framed certifications lined the wall behind his desk, each one perfectly level. He stood when I walked in, shook my hand, and waited until I sat before he sat himself. He did not accuse me of anything. He did not ask if my mother was lying. He did not mention the word court. He started with concern. He said he was sorry I was dealing with something so personal. He said the firm valued my work and my reputation. Then he explained the problem. Our work depended on credibility. We testified, we created timelines, we stood in front of judges and juries and explained why numbers mattered. Any suggestion that an expert witness might be unstable, even temporarily, could be used to undermine an entire case. Defense attorneys did not need truth, they needed doubt. So, for the time being, they were making a temporary adjustment. He said I would be benched. He said it like a safety measure, like a pause button. I would not be assigned new cases. I would not appear in depositions or court. I could still contribute internally, review files, help build reports. This was not a punishment, he assured me. It was risk management. I asked him how long the pause would last. He said that depended on how the situation resolved. He said that if the hearing ended favorably, this could be brief. He said the firm was protecting itself. I nodded. I told him I understood. The truth was, I understood exactly what was happening. No verdict had been issued, but the consequences had already begun. When I returned to my office, my email inbox told the rest of the story. A scheduling update had come through for an elder fraud case that had been moving toward trial. I had been listed as the expert witness responsible for presenting the financial timeline. I opened the attachment. My name was gone. It was not dramatic. There was no explanation, just a revised witness list with someone else in my place. A younger analyst, capable, uncomplicated. I closed the document and stared at the blank wall across from my desk. It felt like being erased in real time. That was when it hit me. The punishment did not wait for guilt. It simply arrived, quietly, with plausible justification. I did not react. I did not send an email. I opened my notebook and wrote down the date, the case number, and the names on the message. Old habits die hard. Documentation had saved me more than once. By midday, the office felt different. Conversations lowered when I passed. People were polite, careful, uncertain. Someone asked how I was doing and did not wait for the answer. I ate lunch at my desk and pretended to work while my mind kept circling the same thought. If this was happening to me, someone with credentials and experience and a clean record, what did it look like for people with less protection? My thoughts drifted to a case from September 2024, one I had followed closely before it was reassigned. An elderly man had been slowly drained of his retirement funds by a nephew who told the family he was confused, that he had always been forgetful. The theft had been incremental, masked as household expenses, framed as help. I remembered standing in that man's kitchen, listening to him say he felt stupid. He had spent his life fixing engines and raising kids. Now he was being told that confusion was the reason he deserved to lose everything. The parallel was impossible to ignore. When I left work that evening, I drove to Brookfield instead of home. I told myself it was because I needed familiarity, something steady. The church my grandmother used to attend had always felt safe to me. It had smelled like old hymnals and lemon cleaner. It had felt like community. Inside, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. A woman who used to hug my grandmother every Sunday smiled at me, then hesitated. Her body remembered affection, her eyes did not. She asked how I was doing and nodded quickly at my answer. She said she was sorry for my loss, then her attention drifted away. Another person patted my arm and said my mother must be having a hard time. They said family situations were complicated. They said they hoped everything would work out. No one asked me what had happened. No one asked what was true. The space between people widened just enough to feel intentional. On the drive home, my phone rang. Daniel. His voice sounded careful. He asked about my day. I told him about the meeting with Thomas, the benching, the witness list. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine him picturing it. He said he had talked to his sister. He said his mother was worried about me. He said that maybe, just to make things easier, I should consider getting a mental health evaluation. He said it could help clear things up. He said it might reassure the court. I felt something in my chest tighten. Not anger, not shock, but disappointment sharp enough to sting. I asked him if he realized what he was suggesting. I asked him if he understood that my mother was trying to paint me as unstable, and that repeating it, even gently, only strengthened her case. He said he did not mean it that way. He said he was just trying to help. He said he wanted this to be over. That was the moment I understood that even good intentions could be dangerous. He wanted relief. He wanted normalcy. He wanted the discomfort to end, and he was willing to trade my dignity for it. I told him I needed time. I ended the call before either of us could say something worse.
I sat in my car in the driveway with the engine off, watching the porch light flicker on as the sky darkened. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked and then stopped. The neighborhood carried on, unaware. That was when the isolation settled in fully. Work had stepped back, community had stepped sideways, the person I loved had faltered, my mother had taken control of the narrative. I realized that if I tried to explain myself to everyone, I would exhaust myself before I ever reached the truth. No one was listening for facts, they were listening for reassurance. I walked into the house and set my keys on the counter. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen until the noise in my head quieted. I typed 2 names at the top of a document: Karen Feldman, Helen McAdams. Then I added 1 sentence underneath: "From this point forward, I speak only through lawyers and paperwork." It did not feel dramatic, it felt necessary.
Chapter 3. Receipts Don't Argue Back. The house in Brookfield still knew me. That was the first thing I noticed when I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale but familiar, like dust and old paper and the faint trace of lemon cleaner my grandmother used every Saturday morning. Nothing had been touched since the funeral. Her shoes were still lined up by the back door. A stack of mail sat on the small table by the window, unopened, as if time had paused out of courtesy. I set my bag down and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. This was where I learned how to sit still. This was where numbers first made sense to me, spread out across the kitchen table while my grandmother watched from her chair, correcting me gently when I rushed. I went straight to the filing cabinet beside the pantry. She kept everything: bank statements, insurance letters, handwritten notes folded neatly and clipped together. I pulled the drawers open one by one, listening to the soft scrape of metal rails. I logged into her bank account from my laptop at the kitchen table. I had done this dozens of times before, ever since she added me as a joint holder in 2021. Back then, she had said it was just in case she forgot a password, just in case she needed help paying a bill, just in case. Now I needed the access for a different reason. The numbers loaded slowly, as if they were reluctant to reveal themselves. I scrolled back through months, then years. At first, everything looked normal: utility payments, groceries, the small donations she made to the church. Then I started seeing the gaps: cash withdrawals. I highlighted the first one and wrote it down, then the second, then the third. They were not huge amounts: $5,000, $7,000, $8,000. Enough to be noticeable, but not enough to set off alarms. Spread out just enough to look like coincidence. By the time I finished, I had 9 entries circled on my notepad: March 2022 through January 2024. 9 withdrawals, $62,400 gone. I sat back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. My chest felt tight, but my hands were steady. That was the part that surprised me. I did not feel panicked, I felt focused. I opened my calendar and cross-checked the dates. Every single withdrawal lined up with a visit from my mother. Not close, not approximate, exact. I whispered it out loud, just to hear it. Every time. My phone buzzed on the table, an email notification. I hesitated before opening it, already knowing what it would be. It was from my mother's attorney, a formal request submitted to the court asking for access to my educational counseling records from my teenage years, records from when I was 14, 15, 17. They were building their case backward, digging for anything that could be reshaped into instability. The timing was deliberate. The next hearing was less than 2 weeks away. Time was not on my side. I closed the email and pushed the laptop aside. I needed something physical, something real. That was when I noticed the notebook. It was tucked into the drawer beneath the phone, its cover worn thin, the edges softened by years of handling. My grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, neat but slightly uneven toward the end. I read slowly. She wrote about forgetting names, about mixing up days, about feeling embarrassed when she had to ask the same question twice. She wrote about my mother helping her with paperwork, standing too close, speaking too quickly. One entry stopped me cold. She wrote that she had signed something she did not fully understand because she did not want to seem incapable. She wrote that she trusted her daughter. She wrote that afterward, something did not feel right. I pressed my fingers to the page, feeling the indent of her pen. My throat tightened. This was not confusion. This was fear. I heard a knock at the door and nearly jumped out of my chair. When I opened it, the bank teller stood on the porch, holding a small envelope. She recognized me immediately. She had known my grandmother for years. She said she was sorry for my loss. She said she had tried calling. She handed me the envelope and said quietly that there were a few documents my grandmother had requested copies of late last year. Inside was a photocopy of a power of attorney document dated November 2023. I stared at it until the words blurred. The signature was real, I knew that. I had seen my grandmother sign her name thousands of times. But the circumstances were wrong. The timing was wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. I called the bank branch and asked to speak to a manager. When she picked up, I introduced myself and explained who I was. She paused, then said carefully that my grandmother had come in with my mother. She said my grandmother seemed quiet that day. She said my mother did most of the talking. She said they notarized the document as requested. I asked who the notary was. She gave me a name. I wrote it down. After I hung up, I sat there in the kitchen, surrounded by evidence that didn't shout. It whispered. It asked to be connected. It asked for patience. My phone rang again. This time it was Daniel. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then I answered. He asked where I was. I told him Brookfield. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was working. There was a pause, then he said gently that maybe I should slow down, that I looked exhausted the last time he saw me. I closed my eyes. I told him I needed to finish something. I told him I would call him later. When I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The pieces were lining up. Not fast enough, not easily, but clearly. I spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, calendar entries, the notebook, the power of attorney. One signature didn't tell the whole story, but together they told a very different one. Chapter 4. It was never just about one woman. I gathered the documents into a manila folder and drove to Karen Feldman's office early the next morning, before doubt had time to creep in and soften the edges of what I had found. The sky over Milwaukee was flat and gray, the kind of sky that made the city feel smaller and heavier. I welcomed it. Bright days made things feel unreal. This needed weight. Karen's office sat on the third floor of a brick building downtown. Nothing flashy, no glass walls or modern slogans. The kind of place you went when you wanted results, not reassurance. She opened the door herself when I arrived. She was 54, composed, hair pulled back, eyes sharp in a way that missed very little. She looked at my face and said quietly, "You found something." I nodded and stepped inside. I laid everything out on her desk without explanation. Bank statements, the printed calendar pages, the notebook, the photocopy of the power of attorney. Karen did not rush. She put on her reading glasses and worked through the stack with the patience of someone who had learned that speed was rarely rewarded in the long run. When she reached the power of attorney, she paused. She held the page closer, scanning the signature, then the notary section. She asked when my grandmother had signed it. November 2023, I said. Karen reached for her phone, typed in the notary's name, and waited. I watched her face change almost imperceptibly, the slightest tightening around the mouth. "The commission expired in 2018, she said. The words did not land like a shock. They landed like confirmation. Karen explained that a notary who was no longer commissioned had no authority to certify anything. The signature might be genuine, but the notarization was invalid. That alone was enough to call the document into question, in some circumstances, enough to void it entirely. "This isn't a clerical error," she said. "This is a misrepresentation." I felt my stomach drop, not with relief, but with something colder. Proof did not feel triumphant. It felt final. Karen set the document aside and leaned back in her chair. She asked me about Richard Hale. I told her what I knew, which was mostly what I had observed over the years. He was quiet. He spoke in short sentences. He let my mother do most of the talking, but he handled money. He liked paperwork. He liked to be copied on emails. Karen nodded as if that fit neatly into something she was already forming. She asked for permission to look deeper. Public records, financial filings, anything with his name attached. I told her to do it. Over the next several days, my life became a waiting room. I went to work and did what I was allowed to do. I answered emails, I reviewed files I could not sign. At night, I sat in my grandmother's house in Brookfield, surrounded by her things, listening to the refrigerator hum and the tick of the clock above the stove. Karen called me back in at the end of the week. She did not sound surprised. She showed me documents from years earlier, long before my grandmother's health declined. From 2012 through 2017, Richard had been listed as a financial contact on multiple accounts belonging to his own mother. During that period, more than $180,000 had been withdrawn, transferred, or otherwise depleted. There had been no police report, no lawsuit. The withdrawals had been explained as caregiving expenses, medical costs, household help. His mother passed away quietly. So did the questions. I stared at the numbers, feeling a slow anger settle into my bones. This was not improvisation. This was repetition. Karen said something I would not forget. People who do this once tend to recognize the opportunity again. That was when she asked me if I knew Lydia Hale. I did. She was Richard's daughter from his first marriage, younger than me, polite, always present, rarely heard. Karen suggested I speak to her. We met at a coffee shop near the river, a place chosen for anonymity. Lydia was already there when I arrived, sitting near the window with both hands wrapped around a paper cup. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slightly curved inward as if bracing. She did not waste time. She told me she had been afraid to reach out. She said she did not know if I would believe her. She said she had signed the affidavit in 2024 because she felt she had no choice. "He told me it was just a formality," she said. "He said it was already decided." She explained that growing up, her father controlled finances in subtle ways. Not yelling, not threats, just decisions that became facts before anyone realized they agreed. When my grandmother's health declined, he stepped into the same role without announcing it. She described dinners where my mother spoke for my grandmother, appointments where conversations moved too fast, moments where she noticed confusion but did not know how to interrupt without being dismissed. I saw it with my grandmother before she died. It was the same. Her voice wavered then and she stopped talking. I waited. She said she signed the affidavit because she was told refusing would cause problems. She said she was warned not to make things harder than they already were. She said she felt sick afterward, but did not know how to undo it. I asked her why she was telling me this now. She looked down at the table and said she was tired of pretending it was normal. When I left the coffee shop, I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. The story had grown beyond me, beyond my grandmother. This was not about a single inheritance or a single family dispute. It was a system that relied on silence and familiarity. Back in Karen's office, I told her everything Lydia had said. Karen listened carefully, occasionally making notes. She said Lydia's account changed the nature of the case. It established context. It suggested intent. It showed a pattern of behavior, not an isolated incident. "This doesn't stay in probate," she said. "Once false notarization and repeated financial exploitation are on the table, it moves." I asked her what that meant.
She said it meant preparing for scrutiny that goes beyond family court. It meant that if the evidence held, other agencies might take interest. It meant that no one involved could assume this would end quietly. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me. They no longer felt like pieces of a puzzle. They felt like a record of choices made over years, each small enough to avoid attention, together impossible to ignore. I did not feel satisfied. I did not feel relieved. I felt steady, because now I understood something important. This was never just about my grandmother. It was never just about me. And once the truth reached this point, there was no safe way back for anyone.
Chapter 5. Quiet Justice Leaves a Long Shadow. The last hearing arrived without ceremony. No reporters, no spectators hoping for drama, just the same narrow courtroom, the same rows of wooden benches, the same seal on the wall that promised neutrality without emotion. It was almost disappointing in its ordinariness, and maybe that was the point. Margaret and Richard Hale walked in together. My mother wore the same calm expression she had perfected months earlier, the one that suggested patience and reason. Richard stayed half a step behind her, hands folded, eyes lowered, as if this were all an inconvenience he expected to pass. To them, this was still something that could be managed, a misunderstanding that had been allowed to grow too large. I sat beside Karen Feldman and felt none of the tightness that had gripped me during the first hearing. Whatever happened next would not depend on how I appeared or how well I controlled my voice. It would depend on what had already been written down. When Karen stood, the room quieted. She did not preface her remarks. She did not frame the story. She simply began. She started with the bank statements. Enlarged copies were passed forward, then projected. Dates, amounts, withdrawal locations. She spoke in a steady cadence, neither accusatory nor apologetic. 9 cash withdrawals, March 2022 through January 2024, each one occurring on a day Margaret Hale had visited Evelyn Whitmore, each one small enough to seem ordinary on its own. Margaret's attorney shifted in his chair. Richard stared at the table. Karen moved next to the calendar records. She showed how the alignments are perfectly with the withdrawals, not approximate, exact. She let the alignment speak for itself. Then she introduced the notebook. My grandmother's handwriting filled the screen. Karen chose only a few lines, never reading too much at once. Notes about confusion, about feeling embarrassed when she had to ask for help, about trusting someone because she did not want to be seen as incapable. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my gaze forward. Judge Helen McAdams leaned slightly closer, her expression unchanged. Karen then presented the power of attorney. She explained the date of execution, November 2023. She explained the role of notarization. Then she presented the certification records, showing that the notary's commission had expired in 2018. She did not raise her voice when she said it. She did not emphasize the word fraud. She did not need to. Judge McAdams asked a question, then another. When did the notary's authority lapse? When was the document signed? Had any corrective action been taken? Karen answered each one. Then she introduced the older records, financial accounts belonging to Richard Hale's mother, withdrawals and transfers spanning from 2012 to 2017, over $180,000 depleted under the explanation of caregiving expenses. No audits, no objections, no follow-up. The courtroom felt different then, not tense exactly, but alert. Karen was careful here. She did not accuse Richard directly. She described a pattern, similar circumstances, similar access, similar outcomes. She explained how financial exploitation often repeats because it relies on proximity and silence. Judge McAdams sat back in her chair. Margaret's attorney stood and requested permission to withdraw the petition. He said his client no longer wished to pursue conservatorship. Judge McAdams shook her head. She said the court would not dismiss the matter at this stage. She said the evidence raised issues beyond the scope of family court. She said the record would be referred to the district attorney and to federal financial crimes authorities for further review. Her voice was calm, final. Margaret's composure cracked just slightly. Richard's hands tightened. The hearing ended without further comment. Outside the courtroom, there were no confrontations, no apologies. Karen told me this was the correct outcome, not the satisfying one. She said patience would be required again. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded quietly. Bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Requests for documentation arrived by mail. Calls went unanswered. People who once spoke confidently grew careful. The Hale name appeared in places it never had before, attached to file numbers and case references. At Midwest Forensic Group, Thomas Reed called me into his office. He told me the firm was reinstating my MOA expert witness. He said the risk was resolved. He did not apologize, and I did not ask him to. Institutions rarely do either. Daniel came by one evening and admitted that he had been afraid. He said he had wanted things to return to normal, even if that meant asking me to shrink myself. I listened. I accepted the apology. I also told him normal was no longer something I was willing to return to without conditions. I kept my grandmother's house in Brookfield. I did not sell it. I did not renovate it. I repaired what needed repair and left the rest as it was. Some places deserve to remain exactly as they were because they remind you who you were before the world tried to redefine you. On quiet nights, I sat at the kitchen table where I had spread out the evidence and let the silence settle. The notebook was stored safely now. The files had been copied and archived. The work they were meant to do had been done. Justice did not arrive with applause or relief. It arrived through persistence, through records, through refusing to let silence do the work of a lie. If there is anything I would ask you to take from this, it is this. Financial abuse rarely looks like theft at first. It looks like help. It sounds like concern. It hides in familiarity and uses shame as its shield. If something feels wrong, write it down. Keep records. Ask questions. Speak before someone else speaks for you. Quiet justice does not announce itself, but when it comes, it leaves a shadow long enough to remind everyone involved that truth, once documented, does not disappear.